The elder to the beloved Gaius, whom I love in the truth. Beloved, I pray that all may go well with you and that you may be in good health, as it goes well with your soul. For I rejoiced greatly when the brothers came and testified to your truth, as indeed you are walking in the truth. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children are walking in the truth. Beloved, it is a faithful thing you do in all your efforts for these brothers, strangers as they are, who testified to your love before the church. You will do well to send them on their journey in a manner worthy of God. For they have gone out for the sake of the name, accepting nothing from the Gentiles. Therefore, we ought to support people like these, that we may be fellow workers in the truth. I have written something to the church, but Diotrephes, who likes to put himself first, does not acknowledge our authority. So if I come, I will bring up what he is doing, talking wicked nonsense against us. And not content with that, he refuses to welcome the brothers and also stops those who want to and puts them out of the church. Beloved, do not imitate evil, but imitate good. Whoever does good is from God. Whoever does evil has not seen God. Demetrius has received a good testimony from everyone and from the truth itself. We also add our testimony, and you know that our testimony is true. I had much to write to you, but I would rather not write with pen and ink. I hope to see you soon, and we will talk face to face. Peace be to you. The friends greet you. Greet the friends, each by name. 3 John, verses 1 to 15. Aloha Trinity Ohana. Welcome to another video devotion. Today we're looking at 3 John. We're taking a break from the Psalms. We started a series in our Evening Grace Sunday night study on the 3 Johns, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and then COVID-19 hit right after 2nd John, and so we didn't get a chance to finish the series. And so I thought it'd be a good idea to finish the series with this short devotional, particularly because this is the shortest book in the Bible, and so it's an appropriate place to do this and finish the series. I wanted to talk a little bit about the nature of the letter and kind of just backtrack a little bit and how to kind of distinguish between 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. It can be a little bit overwhelming when we think about these 3 epistles, and maybe we can get them easily confused. One way that we can keep them separate is to think about their audience. And we begin with 1 John that has a much broader audience. It's written to a number of churches in Asia Minor, and this letter of 1 John would have been circulated among these churches. And so I don't think it's not a coincidence that this is the longest of the 3 epistles that John wrote. Well, 2 John kind of gets more specific in focus. It's written not to a group of churches, but to a particular congregation. And so we see kind of this focus. It gets more and more personal, I suppose. And then 3 John is even more specific. That's what we just read. It is a personal letter written to one individual named Gaius. And that's where we read the opening. It's John writing to the beloved Gaius, whom I love in the truth, says John. We don't know much about Gaius outside of this epistle. There's not a lot of detail given about him. We know he is beloved by John and by the church. He's called that. He's in this address in the letter multiple times. Beloved Gaius. We know that he's a member of a church in Asia Minor, and he most likely is in some form of leadership in the church, because he is one who is showing hospitality to the brothers, that is, traveling missionaries who are coming to bring the gospel to the pagan Gentiles. And so he is providing them housing, providing them food, providing for their needs as they are traveling through the area. And John is writing to Gaius, greatly encouraged by his support of these brothers. In verse 3, he says, "For I rejoiced greatly when the brothers came and testified to your truth, as indeed you are walking in the truth." And this is just the first thing that this letter highlights, is the character of Gaius, and using interesting language, saying that he walks in the truth. And so I guess the question we might ask is, what does that mean? What does John mean when he says that, walking in the truth? Well, one thing that we learned in our study of 1st and 2nd John is when John uses the word truth, he's actually talking about something very specific. He's talking about sound doctrine, and particularly doctrine related to the person of Jesus Christ and the gospel. And this doctrine of these beliefs, these truths about Jesus that have been passed down from the apostles. And so it's interesting, though, that he commends Gaius for not just believing the truth, not just holding to the truth, receiving the truth, but walking in the truth. And this really tells us, I think, something very, very important and very profound about what doctrine is meant to do in our hearts and in our lives. It's not meant to be something that is simply head knowledge or specific facts, but it's meant to actually influence and change the way that we act toward others. It's meant to be practiced, and this is this is important when we see the life of Gaius. I mean, I think oftentimes today we might see these two things pitted against one another, the truth and maybe practice or love. We might see these two ideas kind of pitted against each other. You might hear Christians say, well, yeah, don't talk about all that doctrine, just it's all about loving God and loving people. As if those things are separated from each other in any way. John says no, Gaius is commended for his character because he's walking in the truth. Those things go together. And in fact, John says that there is no greater joy than for his children, than to hear that his children are walking in the truth. That's the greatest desire for a pastor, for a parent, for even a Christian brother to know, to hear that others are walking in the truth. There's no greater joy than to hear this. And what's happening here is that John is sending this letter, 3rd John, to Gaius with more of these missionaries, and he's actually, without requesting that they welcome him, he's assuming that based on Gaius' character that he will receive these missionaries in love. And he tells them that these brothers have gone out for the sake of the name of Jesus. This is verses 5 to 8. He talks about how they've gone out for the sake of the name of Jesus. They've accepted nothing from the Gentiles. That is, they've accepted no payment, no support from those pagan peoples who they are bringing the gospel to. And because of that, John says it is important that we, he's speaking of himself and Gaius and the brothers, and the churches rather, it is important that we support people like these, that we may be fellow workers with them. John is really commending Gaius for a healthy view of the church. We often in church we confess the Apostles' Creed, and in the Apostles' Creed we confess that we believe in one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, and it can kind of be a little awkward when people hear that word Catholic. Oftentimes they just think of Roman Catholic. But this word, I think we need to reclaim it because it is a word that accurately describes the church. It comes from the Greek word katholikos, and it means universal. And this is what Gaius believed. He believed that the church was much bigger and much more glorious than just his local congregation. And he was able to see that and support those who had gone out to bring the gospel to these pagan peoples. And he's able to see and support the work that's going on, to be able to support the spread of the kingdom and the spread of the gospel to these peoples. That's why John says that he is laboring with them in the truth by his support to them. Well, that's the encouraging part of the letter. And then we read in this letter, there comes the discouraging part, and that's when John talks about someone causing trouble and division in the church, and that's Diotrephes. If Gaius had a very healthy view of the church by supporting these missionaries, Diotrephes had a very unhealthy and damaging view of the church. There's three things I just want to mention quickly of Diotrephes. Three things that he describes that was damaging to the church. First, John writes that Diotrephes likes to put himself first. This is a person who's probably also in a position of leadership. He at least is exercising some form of leadership over the church, influence over the church. He wants to be first. He wants to exalt himself. He doesn't really have the spiritual interest of the church in mind. So that's the first thing he does. He loves to put himself first. And second, he does not acknowledge John's authority nor the authority of the brothers, and he doesn't welcome them. And he talks wicked nonsense against us, is what John says. Now this is where 2 John is helpful to us because it kind of gives some background to what's going on. In 2 John, which many believe 2 and 3 John were sent together at the same time, 2 John to the whole congregation and 3 John to just the individual Gaius. But in 2 John, John writes to not welcome these false teachers who are traveling around, who are preaching a different gospel than that which the apostles were teaching. And he says, do not even welcome them in your house or show them any hospitality. He even goes as far as to say that there are antichrists. And that of course is contrasted. That charge to not welcome these people is contrasted here with John commending Gaius for welcoming missionaries who are bringing the truth of the gospel. And so we ultimately don't know the motives for Diotrephes' rejection of the apostles' authority or his spurning away of him turning them away and not showing them hospitality. It could be that Diotrephes was deceived by this other faction, these antichrists. He was deceived by them and he was welcoming them instead and wasn't welcoming the apostles. We ultimately don't know, but what we do know is that he was spreading these malicious lies against the Apostle John and against the church. And thirdly, he doesn't stop there. He also, we're told, stops others in the church from welcoming the brothers, these missionaries bringing the truth of the gospel, and he even puts them out of the church. And so he is using this authority to stop others from welcoming them and even excommunicates them for doing so. And this is where we see John say in this letter that he is about to come and he's going to address this publicly in front of the whole congregation, this issue with Diotrephes. And of course, there's always these moments you think of when if only you could be a fly on the wall, what that would be like. We ultimately don't have a follow-up, but I would imagine it was a very dramatic scene. Paul concludes this letter by encouraging Gaius, and he says, I have much to write to you, but I would rather not use pen and ink. But I hope to see you soon and talk face to face with you, he says. And then he says, peace be to you, talking about the peace of Christ. He says, peace be to you. The friends greet you. Greet the friends, each by name. Well, this short letter is really a glimpse into the life of the local church in the first century AD. From what we just looked at, it's not always a pretty picture. And there's an abuse of power, there's division, there's a struggle for the truth of the gospel. But I think we can be encouraged by John's instruction to Gaius and his encouragement to Gaius, and we can be encouraged by the way that Christ is building his church, even in the midst of these very ugly circumstances. We can be encouraged by that Christ is building his church even among her many flaws. So may you and I be encouraged to seek unity as Gaius did, and maybe we be encouraged to, motivated by the gospel, love others among us. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.